Good afternoon. I am Dr. Ann Brill, Dean of the William Allen White School of Journalism and Mass Communications here at the University of Kansas. Thank you all for joining us on this beautiful Kansas spring day for our William Allen White Day event and scholarship and awards presentation. I am always honored to welcome our guests to campus for this event, but this year it's even more meaningful for all of us to be here together in person. After 2 years of uncertainty and anxiety, but also perseverance, I think we all have a new appreciation for this quote from William Allen White. I am not afraid of tomorrow, for I have seen yesterday, and I love today. William Allen White Day is the signature event for our school, and we look forward to it each year for so many reasons. Of course, it's the day that we honor the namesake of our school, the only named school at the University of Kansas, as well as his commitments to the ideals of journalism, truth, transparency, and defending freedom of the press. Today, as we have for more than 70 years, the William Allen White Foundation will award their national citation to a journalist who exemplifies William Allen White's ideals in service to their profession and their community. Even though only one person will receive that award today, we look forward to seeing back on campus all of our alumni who exemplify those ideals that we continue to teach here at the KU School of Journalism and Mass Communications. Today, we also recognize our students who are committed to learning those values, who believe in the power of this profession and understand how important they are to the future of it. Also today, we honor and celebrate our many donors who are crucial to advancing the mission of this school and the profession at large. Through their generosity, they help students who want to succeed in this field and make a difference, just as previous national citation winners in your programs have done, along with the countless journalists who don't get the credit they deserve, or those who put themselves in danger, or even have given their lives in the pursuit of truth. Today is the day that we set aside to pay tribute to the past, recognize the present, and illuminate the future, and I want to thank all of you for being part of it. And now it is my pleasure to introduce the chair of the William Allen White Board of Trustees. Kathleen Conkey is a New York City media and entertainment attorney who represents journalists, television producers, filmmakers, and authors. Prior to starting her own firm in 2007, she was an in-house lawyer at CBS, King World Productions, MTV Networks, and a litigant associate at DeBase and Plimpton. She graduated from the University of Kansas with a bachelor's degree in journalism and a bachelor's degree in theater, and received her JD from Rutgers Law, Newark. Kathleen?
Thank you, Dean Brill. The William Allen White Foundation has been honoring journalists for 71 years now. Our highest honor, the National Citation Award, goes each year to an individual, team, or organization whose work in journalism and impact on America exemplifies William Allen White's highest ideals. As voted on by the Foundation's Board of Trustees, our National Citation recipient this year is Dr. Sanjay Gupta, Chief Medical Correspondent for CNN and host of the CNN podcast, Chasing Life. What were William Allen White's highest ideals? Chief among them was to speak the truth, popular or not, in plain language, accessible to all. Dr. Gupta has exemplified that quality since joining CNN 20 years ago to report on the world's most important medical stories, but never so much as in the past 2.5 years when Dr. Gupta has reported the truth and the science of the coronavirus pandemic. Offering a calm and authoritative voice in the midst of conspiracy theories, panic, sickness, and death, Dr. Gupta gave viewers a safe harbor of truth, facts, and science. Last year, he won the Brooks Jackson Prize for fact-checking from the Annenberg Center at the University of Pennsylvania for correcting coronavirus misinformation. Not surprising from a man of science like Dr. Gupta. He is a practicing neurosurgeon, an associate professor of neurosurgery at Emory University Hospital, an associate chief of neurosurgery at Grady Memorial Hospital in Atlanta, and a member of the National Academy of Medicine. And He has put that knowledge of medicine and science into service as a journalist. An award-winning CNN reporter, a 60 Minutes contributor, a New York Times best-selling author 4 times over, and a long-form documentarian, a podcaster, and a blogger. Dr. Gupta, would you please join me on stage?
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Can you hear me okay? This is really delightful. I'm really delighted to be here. I think, as was mentioned, I think 2 years of being inside the basement for COVID, just getting out of the house is kind of nice. Coming to a university campus on a beautiful day like this, I'm thrilled, I'm honored to be here, so thank you very much. I thought a lot about what I might say today, and I started off by thinking that I imagine that anyone who has stood on this stage in this forum for this probably should have started their remarks with, "I'm not worthy," some variation of that, not worthy to have an award in the name of William Allen White, the sage of Emporia, the national unofficial spokesman for Middle Americans upon whose back America was built. It's quite an extraordinary thing. Truth is, I don't think there are any concrete measures of this sort of thing. There's no concrete measures of an individual. There are no real and pure measurements of one's overall impact on society. In science, we say there are no correlative measures, meaning that there's something you can't measure and it really has no equal at the same time. So it's very hard for me to feel then that I am deserving of such an award. Add to that I've been a lifetime of being my own best critic, being the person who always sees the flaws, sees my blemishes, the one who perseverates on the what-ifs, the person who may not make sins of accuracy, but makes sins of omission and is plagued by it. There's a lot of similarities between medicine and media, my 2 chosen loves. Sometimes we are fueled by the same things in these professions. And like it or not, sometimes we are defined by it. Defined not necessarily by what we got right, but what we got wrong, what we could have done better, maybe where we fell a little short. And in medicine and media, even if other people don't notice these things, we do. We are all critics, and we are good at it, especially when it comes to ourselves. All of that to say that this award means more to me than you can really know, not just because it carries the name of someone whose legacy has withstood the test of time, but because if there can be such a thing as a measure of any sort, I can think of no better arbiters than all of you to create that measurement and to use it. So thank you very much for this. I got to say, as I was thinking about these remarks and this award, I thought that, if you can't measure certain things, maybe you could measure one's passion for something. Maybe that could be more easily ascertained. And that I have loads of. About 20 years ago, I started pursuing a passion. I was already practicing neurosurgery, but I'd always had tremendous fondness for journalists. I recognized that good journalism not only led to a more informed society, but a more knowledgeable one. And in my mind, these were different things. Information is plentiful nowadays. It is a refined form of data. Whereas knowledge, I felt, represented a greater understanding of the material, an appreciation, a deeper awareness of the issue. In the information-only society, people run the risk of becoming reductionist. The issues start to become increasingly binary. And perhaps most concerning, there develops this burning desire to inject certainty into an inherently probabilistic world. People too often think about things as right or wrong, accurate or not, true or false. But in the knowledge society, we also fully embrace the nuance. We fully embrace the gray areas in between, where real learning and real growth comes from. And I wanted to live squarely in that space. I saw it as important for all facets of society, including my first love, medicine. For starters, I've long thought that the process by which the medical establishment moved could be too slow. It could be somewhat plodding, overly institutionalized, conservative, and cautious to a fault. Sometimes this remarkable idea in some wildly intelligent young person's head would take too long to become a reality that could help people like my grandfather when he developed Alzheimer's, or my mom when she developed breast cancer. Not enough of these ideas would get the attention they deserve. I was concerned about that. Not enough of the stories of the creators of those ideas would be told. And I felt one way to help would be by honestly and fully reporting the scientific achievements, even the incremental achievements, even by those who rarely got enough attention, all the while letting people in on the scientific process, full of gray and full of nuance. I thought it would be rewarding for me and worthwhile for the viewers. I thought it could help us grow. And there was something else. I was always amazed that so many people are so willing to outsource most matters of their health, the most intimate part of their lives, the care of their bodies and their brains. It felt like sometimes it was a black box for so many. In a black box, you can sort of see the inputs and the outputs, but you don't really get a glimpse of how the thing actually works. I wanted to explain the nuance of the black box with the hopes that it could be understood and then appreciated. I wanted to explain things to people, tell them not just the what, but also the why. I hope that it could change the way people would live. I hope that it would cause people to chase life, empowered with this newfound knowledge. I wanted to open the box. I wanted to open the black box and show it to people, make them realize that we had far more in common than we actually realized. I wanted to do it also by telling the stories of us, the stories of us, the stories that bind people together in ways that maybe they don't fully understand. The stories of us and all the connective tissue in between. I remember a particular moment while I was covering the conflict in Syria a few years ago, and I realized that while people couldn't always identify where Aleppo was on a map, they understood when I told them the story of a family that maybe wasn't too different than their own. People going to ATM machines to get money to buy groceries, to pay for gasoline, parents driving their kids to school, dealing with rush hour traffic, planning their weekends, and in the midst of all that, the bombs start falling. And while people may still not be able to identify Aleppo on a map, maybe they would feel more connected to people. Maybe they would feel more curious, more compassionate. Maybe they would feel more compelled to do something, to say something, to see something just a little bit differently. I consider it a tremendous privilege to have this job, to be invited into people's homes at their most triumphant and at their most vulnerable. I've seen people at their very best, but also their very worst. And in both cases, they've always had so much to share. And I've learned a lot of those lessons along the way. For example, the same set of facts and data and evidence, objective things, may be interpreted in very subjective ways. I remember one day during the pandemic, I was doing a bunch of Zoom calls, and I had a call with a group of teachers and superintendents, and a question came up about just how lethal was this virus. And at that point, early days, it appeared to be around 0.5% lethal, about 5 times more lethal than flu, for example. And on the first call, I remember I mentioned that on the Zoom call, and there was this long pause. And then someone said, 0.5%? So that means 1 in 200 people will die? We better be careful. We better take care and protect ourselves. Later that day, another call, same data, and again a long pause. And what I heard this time was, so you're saying we're 99.5% good then, right? 2 completely different reactions. But the lesson here is to understand not just the data, but how the data will be interpreted. Do we have an obligation to understand, truly understand our audience and appreciate that it is a diverse audience at that? If you had the luxury of being at home during the pandemic, a 1 in 200 chance was too much. But if you had to work, even a frontline job, 99.5%, that sounded like a gamble you were willing to take. Even when it came to the vaccine, it may have been surprising to people that there had been such a high percentage of people who simply refused to get vaccinated. There's no doubt that people do this for all sorts of different reasons, and hardly anything nowadays can be disentangled from politics. But the thing is that it's not new. Throughout history, there's often been the doubters, the suspicious ones, the ones who simply don't trust institutions, big institutions of any sort, big government, big business, pharma. Even going back to the 1918 flu pandemic, 17 to 20% of the people did not want to abide by basic public health measures, and those numbers aren't too far off today. Maybe it's just who we humans are. But the thing is that those who are vaccine reluctant may sometimes be suspicious because they see themselves as the ones with their antennas raised the highest, the ones who are scanning for threats. They're the ones catching the things everyone else misses. They see themselves not as sowers of doubt or creators of chaos as much as they see themselves as sort of guardians of the galaxy, sort of protectors. These are the things you always have to think about, especially when you're reporting these types of issues. And for me in medicine and media, sometimes my worlds would come crashing together. Someone asked me earlier when I was talking to the students, what was my most memorable story? And when you do this for 20 years, you have a lot of memorable stories. But early on, I was covering the conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan, and I was embedded with a group of doctors known as the Devil Docs, colloquially known as the Devil Docs. They're Navy doctors who travel with the Marines, and they take care of the injured right as they come off the front line. When you're an embedded reporter, you're spending a lot of time with the people that you're reporting on. And most of the time, when you cover a conflict, it's boring. There's not much going on. It's 90% boring, and then it's 10% just absolute terror. And you go back and forth, whiplash back and forth. But you really get to know the people that you're reporting on. And they knew that I was a neurosurgeon, I was an embedded reporter, they knew all these things. And one day, a few months into the conflict, there was a battle just outside of Baghdad, and a young lieutenant got shot in the head. Sniper. It was hot, he had sort of taken his helmet off, and he got shot in the back of the head. They weren't sure if he was going to survive. The Marines, as they say euphemistically, cleaned up the place and then went and got his body, and they brought it back to this Devil Docs camp. They knew that I was a neurosurgeon. They asked me if I would take off my journalist cap and put on a surgeon's cap and operate on this young man. Of course, I was honored to do so, this young lieutenant. I wasn't sure just how devastating the injury was, but we actually saw that he had a significant injury to the back of his head, but we had no equipment to operate on him with. I needed a drill to remove the bone to decompress his brain. At some point, we realized the only thing that I could actually probably use was the Black & Decker drill that we've been using to put up the tents over the past couple of months. We sterilized the bit. I took the drill. I used that to remove this portion of bone. I removed the blood collection and the bone fragments and the bullet fragments that were in his brain. I used an IV bag to recreate the outer layers of his brain. A Black Hawk helicopter landed, and he was taken away. Didn't really know anything about him, other than his name, Jesus Vidania, a lieutenant in the Marines. I wasn't sure I'd ever see him again. A couple months later, I was in my office back in the States, and I got a phone call one day, and it was area code 619. I still remember area code 619, which is San Diego. And I answered the phone, and voice on the other end said, is this Dr. Gupta? I have an update on one of your patients. First thing I said was, I think you might have the wrong Dr. Gupta. As it turns out, there's quite a few of us out there. Said, no, I think I got the right guy. Do you remember operating on Jesus Vidania over in Iraq? I said, yeah, of course I remember. How do you forget operating on Jesus in the middle of the desert? But I didn't know how he had done. And the guy said, well, he's got a little bit of left hand weakness, but other than that, he's doing well. You should pay him a visit when you're in Southern California sometime. So it turns out I was in Southern California the next week. I looked him up. I went to his house, knocked on the door, and Jesus answered. He's this big, strapping, handsome young Marine. I had not seen him ever, but beaten and battered on the desert floor, so it was kind of remarkable to see him like that. We shook hands and we kind of got into it, started chatting. Young guy, early 20s, still living with his parents. A little bit later, his mother comes out. She's so sweet. She's talking to me, and she says, are you the guy that operated on my son? I said, yes, ma'am, I am. And she took my hand and was thankful. A little bit later, the dad came out. And dads are different, right, than moms? Are you the guy that operated on my son? He said, yes, sir, I am. He goes, and you're a journalist? Hadn't gotten the whole story. But I explained to him what had happened. And I realized something in that moment, which is that they had never really talked about it as a family. He'd been shot in the head. He nearly died. He was operated on by me. He went to Kuwait City, went to Landstuhl, went to Walter Reed, and they were just going through their life worried about his survival, and they never really talked about what had happened. And I realized that in that moment as a journalist, I was doing something that I had never really anticipated doing, which was nurturing and fostering a conversation that otherwise would not be had. That is the real growth sometimes that comes from what we do. William Allen White was no doubt right when he said that the facts fairly and honestly presented, and the truth will take care of itself. He was right, but he was also prescient. And there was many times, I got to tell you, over these last 20 years, where I wish that I could have gotten the wise counsel from someone like him. But thanks to all of your hard work, his wisdom continues to inspire another generation of journalists, and I'm honored to be here today to help honor that legacy as well. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gupta, for joining us and sharing your insights and those wonderful stories about what is the challenging and exciting and ultimately very rewarding profession of journalism and medicine. At this time, I would like to welcome Kathleen back on stage to present the National Citation.
Dr. Gupta, we are very happy to have you here today. Please accept this award with the gratitude of the William Allen White Foundation and the William Allen White School of Journalism and Mass Communications and the students of the school.
Thank you. That's beautiful.
As an added bonus today of having Dr. Gupta with us, please know that he has contributed his honorarium to the Journalism School Scholarship Fund. We have. Thank you. We do, I think, do we have time for just a few questions? Very, very few. Dr. Gupta has to catch a plane. Please remember to keep your questions succinct and ask a real question. No speeches, please. And let's go ahead and take some questions. Anyone? You ready?
I'm going to start. I actually have a question for you, Dr. Gupta, and that is, what one question do you wish people would ask you?
You know, it's funny. I'm a doctor, I'm a journalist, but I think in many ways I define myself most as a dad. I have 3 teenage daughters, and I think it's one of it's one of the best parts of my life. And I think oftentimes our roles as parents maybe gets a little glossed over. I think it's my most important role. So I guess the question would be about just being a dad to 3 teenage girls. I don't know if I'd have a great answer to that because I'm sort of making it up as I go along. But I just think I think there was a time in my life when I wasn't sure with the sort of work that I do that I'd ever be a parent. And now it's like one of the brightest spots in my life. So I just, I think about them all the time, but I also think about all the parents out there who take on this enormous privilege to raise children, and we're all sort of figuring it out as we go along.
Over the past 2 years, family has become, sorry, I'm over here. Over the past 2 years, family has become so important. So building on that, how do you balance your 2 professional lives and then your personal life being with your family as well?
Yeah, well, it's hard. It's not easy. And, if I had, like looking back, when I was starting all this, I think if I had a person in my life who could have just helped me with that part of things, the procedural part of things, like organize your life like this and don't skip these things and prioritize this way, I think that would have been really helpful. Realizing, of course, everyone's a bit different, but I'm very busy. I don't spend a lot of time doing other things. I don't even watch a lot of television, which is ironic, but besides my work and my family, there's not a lot else right now in my life. And that, weekends and everything and vacations, and I take a lot of grief from my wife and kids about that, especially over the last couple of years. But, I think I recognize what's important, and those are the most important things in my life. So while I may not have as much of some of the other things that I think a lot of people spend their time doing, I do these things pretty fully. I've been doing this for 20 years now, so I think I've gotten a better cadence of things. I've figured out a schedule, and I've learned how to prioritize. But it's a constant work in progress, especially when you work in 2 fields where things can change very quickly. I was telling the dean, even as I was coming here today, I found out I'm probably going to Ukraine this weekend. So that was new, got to go pack my bags and get on a plane at some point. But that's just sort of how life goes, and you gotta enjoy it. You gotta enjoy the privilege of it.
So, Dr. Gupta, since we have you here, what's the update on COVID-19? What can we expect in the next 6 to 12 months?
I don't know. I mean, I think you got to be humble with these things. We were having this conversation at lunch, and we are dealing with a novel virus here, and I think people always want to speculate on how this virus is going to behave based on how other viruses have behaved, and I think that we've been surprised several times over the last couple of years. I think July of last year we thought it was basically over, July 4th, and Delta, blindsided us. Omicron surprised us. I think as a general rule, we do see things improving in most parts of the country. I think that's good. There are a couple places in the country in the Northeast where numbers are going up. I've been following that very closely. Not just the numbers, but also the hospitalizations have gone up a bit. I think the larger question probably is almost more of a philosophical one. This virus is here, and it's going to stay. I mean, we have remnants of the 1918 flu that still circulate today. That virus became endemic, and this one will as well. But the thing about defining something as a pandemic, it's very clear. You have sustained human-to-human transmission of a virus in several places around the world. Defining when something becomes endemic is a lot more challenging, and one of the biggest criteria is it still causing a disruption in that society's way of life? I think if 500 people are dying a day, that's still a pretty significant disruption. If there's still a lot of virus in the air, that's still a pretty significant disruption. I think we will get to the point where it's going to seem more like flu in terms of those numbers, and maybe that's a good marker, because we're willing to accept flu. Flu kills about, in a year, could kill 60,000 people. It's a lot of people. Fewer than half the people in the country get a flu shot. 60,000 people die. That became our steady state in this country. A lot of my colleagues in other countries look at us and they say, you're spending billions of dollars, maybe hundreds of billions of dollars taking care of flu, and it's largely preventable. But that's sort of what this society decided to do. And we may get to that point with COVID as well. I don't think we're there yet. I think if things continue, we'll probably continue to have a virus that may be very transmissible, but less and less pathogenic, less and less likely to make people sick. And at some point, we'll basically say that it's now endemic. It's here, but it's not causing that disruption anymore. And I'm like you. I hope that comes as soon as possible.
Dr. Gupta, thank you for being with us today. We've learned a little from you how your medical training has influenced your reporting. I'm curious if you have an example of how being a journalist has influenced your medical practice.
Yeah, you know, I'm really glad you asked that. It does go both ways. It's interesting, and I did not anticipate that. I think when you're there's a lot of medical journalists who are not doctors. You don't need to be a doctor to be a medical journalist. I happen to be one, and the same is true with financial reporters and legal reporters. I think it helps because I'm working in a hospital. I have my thumb on the heartbeat of what's happening in hospitals. I think it informs my reporting. But the idea of the journalism informing or helping my medical practice was a very nice sort of surprise in a way. I think if you're a journalist, you're always looking for the story. You're always, it gives you a lot of joy to find the story. And my patients, they all have stories. They all have these incredible stories. I had this example where I took care of as a neurosurgeon, we operate on the brain and the spine. And I had a man who I operated on who had a herniated disc in his lower back, something that was causing him back and leg pain. And I was sitting with him and I said, "So what happened?" And he proceeded to tell me the story about how he was fly fishing and the waters were starting to rise a little bit. His boots got stuck in the mud and he was trying to extricate himself from this, and eventually he sort of fell forward so that his feet and his head were both in the water, and like a U, like an upside down U. And eventually, to get himself out, he had to thrust his back, and in that process, he herniated a disc. I'll never forget that story. I could totally imagine him doing this. And now when my medical students or my residents present to me, they're telling me about a patient, they always present the story. It's not the 43-year-old guy with an L5-S1 disc. You remember the guy who was fly fishing, got his head and his feet stuck in the water? And I love the stories. And I think when you tell the story, it makes it far more memorable, both for the patient and for the doctors, but also in terms of teaching and learning. So that's something that I have taken back and forth between journalism and medicine.
I'm curious. There was a time when you were a doctor and you weren't a journalist and you were thinking about being a journalist. How did you prepare yourself to add journalism in to medicine?
It was a really strange path for me. What I was always interested in as a doctor was primarily taking care of patients. I became increasingly interested in the policy of healthcare during my residency, and I took some time off even to work at the White House on domestic policy issues around healthcare and writing speeches on these topics. When I started working at CNN, when I started becoming a journalist, it was mainly with the idea that that's what I would be doing. I'd be talking about those sorts of topics, healthcare policy, how a country defines how they're going to take care of people, how does it correlate with their values, how does it compare to other countries. That's what I was going to do, that's what I had written about, and that was in August of 2001. 3.5 weeks later, 9/11 happened. And the bosses essentially came to me and said, "Look, we're probably not going to be doing healthcare policy for a while, but you're a doctor now working at an international news network in the midst of all this. Are these stories that you want to cover?" And I did. The attacks in New York, the anthrax scares, and then going in to cover the conflicts in Afghanistan and then Iraq. I'd always been fascinated by that. And again, I was talking to the students earlier. I think at a fundamental level, what had really fascinated me about doing those sorts of stories and reporting on organizations like the Devil Docs was I just considered it some of the most human stories I'd ever heard. You're in the middle of a conflict. You're seeing booms and explosions. You know people are getting hurt. You can't see it. But you also know people are rushing in to save other people's lives at tremendous risk to themselves. on any given day, these people are saying, today I'm going to risk my life for someone who is a total stranger, because that's what I do. And I found it so inspiring and so human that I figured those are the types of stories I wanted to cover. I don't know that there's any preparation for this. And if you work in a place like CNN, it's true baptism by fire. You're all of a sudden just doing it. I mean, 3.5 weeks after I started, I was covering stories like that. Kind of a remarkable thing. But you just sort of learn on the fly. And, you know, I think like most people who work in this field, I'm fortunate to be surrounded by incredible producers and directors and people who have helped navigate my career along the way. I was sharing with somebody earlier that I take great pride in the fact that I've been doing this for 20 years, and in both medicine and media, most of the people that I started working with, I'm still working with. We stuck together. We really like each other, and we really like the work. That's sort of how it came together.
Just want to say it's a huge honor to be in the same room as you.
Thank you.
But also, there are so many student journalists in this room with us today. And as a young, inspiring journalist and someone that has over 20 years of experience, what is a word of inspiration or advice that you would like to give?
I mean, look, I hope all my remarks in some way were a note of inspiration. I had great fondness for journalists before I entered this field, and that fondness has only grown. I think the role is indispensable. And frankly, I think maybe it's more important than ever. We were in a conversation at lunch about, like, what is the future going to look like for journalists? And, you know, again, nobody knows. It's changing. Even today, it's changing a lot. But I think there's always going to be a very important role to help create that knowledge society that allows us to evolve and grow as humans. I think journalists may have maybe one of the, if not the most important role in making that happen.
And
Is there time for one more question?
One more question.
I'd like to hear your story about the accordion. What's your favorite song? What made you choose to learn the accordion? How do you have time to play the accordion?
Somebody's been doing their homework. Yeah. Yes, I play the accordion. Well, the real story, it's kind of funny. You know, I'm Indian, in case you didn't know, and my parents immigrated to this country from India, and in Bollywood movies, especially in the 60s, the instrument of choice was the accordion. So when they moved to this country and I was born, they said, my son will play the accordion. Now, the only other people that really played the accordion were people of Polish descent, so I played a lot of polkas. That's what I played. I mainly learned polkas when I was growing up, and I've kind of self-taught myself after that. Now it's just a lot of fun, especially with 3 teenage girls who, at the exact same time, both enjoy my playing and mock me for playing it, all at the same time.
Thank you again, Dr. Sanjay Gupta. We thoroughly appreciate it, and it was a total pleasure to host you here. And we have one more gift for you. You may have heard that the KU basketball team did rather well. And so this very sought
Congratulations, that's huge. Congratulations.
Yes. And on that note, Dr. Gupta does have a plane to catch, and so we will bid him farewell with one final thank you and round of applause.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.